G-Tech here at Google, Kelly Allison. We have someone who has been good for politics, Independent Senator Catherine Zippo. And we have someone who has been fighting very hard for human rights all over the world, Executive Director of Amnesty Ireland, Colin O'Gorman.
So I think that might be a good time to address the question to you guys. How many people here are out in their workplace? Okay, these are nice numbers. So I think actually a good place to start would be what we just talked about, conversation at workplace. So can you please share with us your first time that you're coming out of the closet in your workplace? Colin, do you want to start?
Oh dear God. Back in the annals of time. Well, you know, my coming out story, so I came out when I was 17,
yeah.
Which was in 1983, tragically. But I mean, I suppose it's important to name what that was like, because you didn't just come out once, you know, you had to come out every time.
Right.
I mean, I think that's probably true to some degree, but you had to come out every single time, or in every new relationship that you formed, or in every new place that you went to work. And the most crippling aspect of that, and I wonder how many people here might relate to this one, is those ridiculous, awful moments where you find yourself trying to use gender-neutral language for the people in your life. I mean, how awfully, horribly self-denying and shame-enforcing is that? But for me back then, I mean, that was just an absolute reality, and it remained that way for probably 15 years.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was only in my early 30s where that changed very significantly. In part, that was because my work kind of became much more public. And I remember making the decision, because I lived in the UK for a long time, making the decision to come back to Ireland, and then having this big moment about going, okay, so how do I come out without coming out? Because I didn't want to make a big statement, but neither did I want to, you know, do anything that might deny who I was. So I think that was kind of one of the more challenging moments. I mean, the very notion that we have to come out is both in and of itself kind of, well, it used to strike me as particularly ridiculous. I mean, the fact that we had to do it was incredibly important, and it was a really important thing to do. But the fact that it had to be so difficult was the part that was obscene, which then reinforced why it was so important that we did it, I guess, you know, in a weird way. But those awful moments where you're kind of saying, so yeah, my other half does, and you're desperately trying to avoid saying he, or even, you know, you don't want to say she, because that would be an outright lie, so you're just going to lie by default and not say he. I mean, that for me was the most horrible, self-denying, hideous part of it.
Okay, thank you.
I lie sometimes.
Well, can I ask a question? I kind of didn't get away with it so much when I was 17, so it was a bit more obvious perhaps. Well, I have a quick question. Which was the biggest cheer for it, lesbian or Airbnb? I couldn't figure it out. Okay.
Lesbian!
I believe you, I don't believe me. I said both.
I want to just start by saying I think that the decision to come out, and especially if you're, you know, maybe into your young adulthood or later adulthood, is a very personal decision. And no one should feel as if, you know, they should be forced to do that. And I feel very, very strongly about that. And so I think it's really brave, those of you who raise your hand. I think it's really brave, those of you who didn't. Because it's something that, certainly I know for myself, you know, we all fear that. And it's really just a question of what do you do with the fear. And sometimes you need to protect yourselves. And sometimes you're ready to, you know, just, and sometimes you know that in moving on, you'll eventually be okay. So, as for when I first came out, well, again, what does that really mean? I fell in love with the girl next door at 6 years old. But I didn't really know that's what I was doing. You know, I just wanted to be with her all the time. So So I mean, if I was thinking about, you know, if you were asking
You still kind of do.
Anyhow, so, you know, but so there's all sorts of times and moments, and coming out to yourself, coming out to, so maybe that's what, you know, Colin, when you were saying, maybe at 17, but yeah, you know, 16 or 17, I was in love with an adolescent girl at that stage, and actually, you know, that's when I first, I think, really came to understand that part of myself. We had an intimate relationship, but, you know, part of it was, am I really, you know, or just, am I really doing this? Am I not doing this? What does that mean? But, like, that was a long time ago. I mean, even though I am obviously from the United States of America and the land of the free, in the late 60s, early 70s, you know, that didn't make any difference in terms of being lesbian or gay. So, but I had a relationship. It was wonderful. You know, it lasted for a long time.
Do you remember that first moment?
Huh?
Do you remember that first moment that you were telling?
Oh, the first moment?
That you were telling someone else?
Oh, yeah.
Before you go, before it starts to get crossed. First moment that you told somebody.
When you come out to your parents, now some of you know, anyhow, I put this in a book I once wrote. I was I 33 or 35? I mean, you know, and I wrote them a letter across the sea. I'm in Ireland, they're in the United States of America, and I only did it because my sisters wrote me a letter. This is one of the days of letters, so my sister wrote me a letter saying, your brother, Mark, my youngest beautiful brother, who is also gay, he told Mom and Dad that he was gay, so you better let them know. I'll get to the word.
I would totally agree with Colm, actually, that it isn't a one-time event. I would say in my career, I've probably come out and gone in the closet several times. Actually, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where I was listening to a woman named Dawn Airy, who is now a VP at Yahoo, and she shared one stat which was something like 40% of people who are out at university or college, they actually go back in the closet in their first job, which I thought was quite fascinating. That's a big stat. So I would say one of my more memorable coming out stories was prior to the role that I'm in now, which is leading a team of about 70 people around the world, like doing a lot of engineering projects for various products at Google. I used to have a role as the director for business development at Google. And in a BD type role, and in my previous role at a big telecoms company, I was spending a lot of time with sales guys. And you'd go out to meetings. One very memorable evening was when they, of course, wanted to buy me a lap dance. And you find yourself in these situations where you're just like, okay, now is the right time. I'm going to share something with you that I've avoided up until now, but now is the right time. And yeah, I think having role models at work is like one of the most critical things. It makes you feel really comfortable. I started out in Anderson Consulting, and early on in my career, I was very, very conservative at the time, quite shy about coming out. I was like quite ambitious in my career, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to tell anybody, I'm just going to keep it to myself. But I realized I missed out on a lot of opportunities to network with people at the time. Fortunately, I ended up joining a startup immediately after that, maybe about 2 years later, and the CTO of that company happened to be gay. And he was an out man. He is still one of my great role models. And then after that, I ended up going back to work for another company that acquired us. Very, very conservative. I unfortunately had a manager who made homophobic comments all the time, which drove me back in the closet. So it's kind of amazing. Yeah, you really do come out and go in throughout your career. But now, thankfully, for the last 10, 12 years of my career, I've completely been out, and anybody that wants to know, I'm happy to share it with them.
Taking a flag every day.
And so in coming to that point in your life where you're comfortable coming out or making a decision time and again, could I ask you each what it felt like in the period afterwards, once you had kind of committed and come out of the closet? How did you feel? What was your sense of yourself? what happened.
When you finally come out fully, is that what you're?
Yeah.
In the
They
workplace
asked us.
specifically, you know.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Especially Kelly, because you're in what's called business. I suppose I've never really been in business per se, politics, NGO, that kind of. And you know, you'll maybe be able to speak a different language there. But I would think that the bottom line is if you're free to be yourself, if you don't have the stresses and the anxiety in terms of, let's say your partner or your girlfriend or your boyfriend comes to visit you at work, and you have, who knows, you might just get a tender moment or something, and you're kind of running around the corners, whatever it is. But certainly, or then if you have family, to have to worry and to be afraid absolutely clamps down on your sense of your creativity, your confidence, your sense of well-being, all of those things. So of course, if those are clamped down, you're not going to be good in the workplace, but what I have to say, I want to say that the first workplace I ever felt fully out and free to be that and really happy was Leinster House. That's our So that's how much things have changed.
But I wonder if that's as well about the fact that, well, quite frankly, it's impossible for you not to be gay. And I think it at that stage, right, because you were so publicly identified, and Catherine, I'm sure everybody in the audience knows the role that Catherine has played over the last number of years, particularly in advancing the case for marriage equality in Ireland, and being prepared to be. I was thinking a little bit about that myself, and I was trying to think of so if you come out now, it's like I don't come out anymore. I'm just so out that it's impossible to be in, So, and I don't mean that because I go, ooh. It's more that if you're in the public eye in some form, and that's just out there. It's just out there. And actually, you then have the weird luxury, which can be challenging at times, of just not being able to take on board other people's shit. It's like if somebody else has a problem, I don't have time or the inclination or the energy to engage with that. And quite frankly, when you get to a particular place in your work, they kind of just have to keep that to themselves. And you'll only engage with it when it becomes enough of a problem for you to have to engage with it. But I think that can mask, to a degree, the problems that exist. And the way in which people shut up and don't hide their bigotry or their homophobia or their prejudice because they know there's no point in them presenting that, or it's just not going to be engaged with. And I think that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but isn't that part of the change column? I mean, you're right. It's not that there isn't any homophobia in Leinster House. That's true. But I really do feel deeply respected, and first, but it's true to say though that I'm sure, especially with some of the, some of you know, some of my colleagues exactly who would be well known for being prejudiced against LGBT people, is that, I'm sure when they first met me, all they could see was L. Maybe they didn't see married. I mean, that was because they just, you can't do that. So they kind of reduce your identity to your intimate relationships, but then when they start, they get to know you, and hopefully there's a lot more there. But so I'm not trying to say that it isn't the case that there isn't homophobia there, but I feel very, very free there, and I think that's because a lot has changed, and I'm sure it's because of a lot of things that you all here have done in different ways, and it's a very different experience for me. I mean, in terms of when I was in another workplace when I first came to the country for a decade, and I believe I lost my job there, opportunity for a job, because I was a lesbian. I wasn't fully out, but because I was a lesbian, and frankly, I lost my job, my career. I'd done 2 or 3 degrees to prepare myself for that. It took me 2 or 3 years to find my way to something else. So it was awful, horrible, the worst thing in the world. But, as I was saying, we are sharing this a little bit with Connor when we were going back to get my phone so I could tweet a little bit.
We haven't done it all yet. We'll be in trouble now. We've got instructions from guests.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just about to do that. That you know, as you say in Ireland, when one door closes, another one opens, and it did for me. It just took a long time, but you know that's the I suppose some of the risk that we all have to take if we're going to take the steps to be ourselves and to be free and to be happy. And in doing that, because we are a minority, just in doing that, we're participating, I think, in creating the change.
So one of the amazing things that I found was that when you don't feel like you have to hide your real identity and you can really come out and be yourself in the workplace, you have so much more energy for your real job. Okay, like basically, I found myself spending so much time trying to like skirt around the issue. We were having a chat earlier. I'm actually a stepdad to 2 kids as well, so you can easily have this conversation where you're like, okay, take my kids to school this weekend or this week or whatever, and you can hide it so easily. But the thing that I found that I wasn't doing was establishing really honest relationships with my colleagues. I had this fear that was now, in retrospect, I think it was completely unfounded, that these people would somehow not respect me or it would somehow create a rift in our working relationship. The reality is that you just spend so much time and energy focusing on that and trying to stay in the closet that you're not actually focusing on your job. And from my perspective, I think that's one of the most important things is like just kind of get over it. You choose your time and your place, and obviously there's some situations where you may not feel comfortable doing it, but from my personal experience, I just had so much more energy after I let go of that.
And it makes a lot of sense because when you think about it, it's when you're passionate about what you do that you bring the best of yourself to it. Yeah. And if what you have to hide is your passion, you know, the way in which you love, the nature and quality and depth of the love that you feel for your family, for the people in your life, then how do you bring all of your passion for living and loving into your work? And it's a really important dimension of it. So absolutely, I think it's incredibly important from the perspective of being free in order to live the kind of lives of dignity that we want to live, in order to know that we're both valued on an equal basis with other colleagues, but also that we value ourselves and that we demand that value of ourselves. That's incredibly important, obviously, but also if we're to bring all of ourselves to what we do. I mean, how do you... There are, of course, boundaries, always boundaries with how much of your own life you bring into work. And, you know, you're not going to bring everything about your life into work. But if you're having to hide so absolutely that aspect of your life and the depth of the quality of your life from work.
Has anybody here heard of Lord John Brown's book, The Glass Closet?
It's funny you should mention that.
Is that inspired by?
Yeah, it's inspired by.
Okay, fantastic. Has anybody else read the book or? Anybody? Well, not
somebody.
One person. 2 people.
Yeah, a few more. Yeah.
I would highly recommend you pick it up. But basically, in that he has lots of stories about how people probably knew a long time ago. Sorry, for those of you who don't know, John Brown is the former CEO of BP. There was a bit of a scandal which he readily shares now with any audience while he's doing his book tour, and he had a bit of a run-in with a Canadian rent boy that ended up selling the story and basically outed him in the job. It was all quite tragic, and he's learned lots of lessons about that whole experience, and he's now written this book. But one of the things that he says is that he hadn't realized how the relationships that he had in his career for like the 20 years prior to that, they were just scratching the surface. So like he had talked to a lot of friends and people afterwards. You just keep your conversation with these people so superficial, and being successful in the workplace requires building relationships and networking and building trust. And the one thing that people won't necessarily do is trust you if they don't feel like you're being honest. And people can sense that quite easily.
I have another kind of quick question. Do you feel like along the years, because you were talking about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, that the reactions are a little bit different?
30 years ago, God.
Okay. So 50 years ago, so do you...
It's not just a lesbian, she's a bitch. Shade off.
That's a good question. The world world has changed. So I came out in 1994.
But I think we all kind of know that the world's changed, but on a personal level, do you feel that the reaction to you coming out is...
I think it's hard to separate me being a little bit older and being a lot more confident with myself.
Right.
You know, when you're younger in your 20s, like, I just don't think you have the perspective necessarily.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really hard to tell, but I was sharing the story with Colm earlier, again, a comment that my stepson made when my partner and I told him that his father was gay at the age of 11, and his comment was so telling of kids of this next generation, where he basically said, "Oh, that's great, I didn't want a wicked stepmother anyway."
I think what's profoundly different is that homophobia is on the back foot. Now, I don't mean it's gone, and I don't mean that it's not there and doesn't need to be challenged, particularly when it begins to manifest in especially insidious ways. I think, as we've seen in Ireland over the last year or so, you know, that somehow homophobes are now deeply insulted by the notion that their homophobia can be called out. It's the most bizarre thing. They're the victims of homophobia. And that but it is interesting that it's almost now seen as the most appalling thing you could accuse somebody of. And yet at the same time, the simple reality is, I mean, I remember writing something for GCN following on from that, going, you know, I'm a homophobe and so is my husband. Because you can't grow up, and you can't have grown up in this society not have taken on board views that are bigoted and prejudiced towards a whole range of people, including towards yourself as an LGBTI person. So, you know, that's a journey that we go on. And I mean, I don't know if we ever get to a point where we've dealt with all of our internal prejudices. But undoubtedly, I think the homophobia is on the back foot. So it's no longer allowed to manifest in the way that it was. It's now more hidden, you know. And actually, I think I think that coming out is celebrated or seen as valuable, and that there's an increasing recognition that to deny people the capacity to live fully as who they are is to do them a very, very grave injury. And we're recognizing that more and more. You know, conversations around the impact on mental health of LGBTI young people. You know, the fact that 25% of all LGBTI young people in Ireland in research done for Trinity belong to and Glenn, I think, had attempted suicide, and that there was a direct link between their suicide attempt and their sexuality. I mean, you know, this narrative has suddenly, these important facts are beginning to emerge, and I think therefore people recognize that coming out, that being able to live gloriously and fully in the truth of who you are is an essential right, and is something that society needs to support. That's changed. We're still, I think we need to challenge a lot of the insidious stuff, but we're a long way along. And as you say, we were talking earlier on, you know, myself and my partner have 2 kids as well, and you know, it's been so joyful seeing the way in which their peers and themselves deal with these kinds of questions. I live in North Wexford, just about north of Gorey. Our kids go to Gorey Community School. It's one of the largest community schools in the country. I remember when they were going there first, so when they were going to primary school, when they went to national school, we were terrified to send them to the little local school. So we started an Educate Together school in Gorey to avoid that happening, which was brilliant. And then when they went to go to community school, we were all caught up in the notions of how this would be, and this would be really difficult. And it's been fabulous. Not because, actually, quite frankly, the school is particularly fabulous, but because their peers are. It's of no consequence. And I realized that it was when I suddenly started to pick up conversations that I'd hear in the back of the car, or just things they'd be talking about their friends, when their friends started to date people and that kind of stuff. And you'd suddenly realize that, you know, a guy could be dating a guy, or a girl could be dating a girl, and it was of no consequence. It was utterly unremarkable for them. And that was extraordinary. You know, in rural, small-town Ireland, that really is remarkable. And I think that's one of the big shifts.
Yeah. But just to kind of just pick up on something Colin said there in terms of, you know, you don't know if you ever get over your own internal homophobia, and I would agree with that, or there's always a little bit farther to go. Like, I'm just thinking, you know, that fits with your question. Really, isn't any different now? Isn't any different now in terms of coming out? Like, I'm here 30 plus years in Ireland. I came to Ireland to follow my beloved, who's Irish, an Irish woman. We met each other in Boston College when we first started a doctoral program together.
She's fabulous.
I came from Seattle and she came from Ireland, and they only took 2 people that year, and it was us. And so it was meant to be But when I came back, I often got asked, well, why did you come? Why are you here? Did you marry an Irishman? And that's what I said. Oftentimes I said yes. Oftentimes I said yes, and that was a terrible feeling and experience. But even more recently, let's say even in the last year or so, and I get into a taxi cab and they'll ask me, did you marry an Irishman? 99% of the time they say no, but there might be that one time. I don't even, and I feel terrible afterwards.
It depends how much you want to engage with the taxi driver.
Well, this is a big confession, but the other side of that is when I do say, no, I married an Irish woman, and the taxi driver will kind of pause for a moment and then look back at me and says, well, what does she do?
When we were talking about this subject, we were trying to think of different angles of it, and we were thinking, what kind of responsibility do our colleagues have when we're telling them something like that? And our colleagues can be the managers or can be the people that we actually work with. What do you think about that?
Well, I think let's talk about it from the point of view of the organisation and managers first. They don't just have responsibilities, they have legal obligations.
Right.
So, for anybody to come out in their workplace should never be an issue. And I mean, the one positive thing that happened very early post the decriminalisation in 1993 was equality legislation. And we have actually very good and very robust equality legislation in Ireland.
USA.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, law only matters if it's fully implemented, but actually the Equality Authority, etc., as it was, has been very, very good in the Equality Tribunal on ensuring that the legislation is properly implemented and enforced. So organisations and managers, therefore, have clear duties of care and legal obligations towards their colleagues, towards the people that they manage. But I suppose in terms of the responsibilities that we have towards each other as colleagues, we'll broaden that out a little bit. We all have responsibilities to treat each other with dignity and with respect. And that should extend to any area of our lives. So in the same way as we might feel a responsibility to respect a colleague in terms of their choices and their life choices, well, I think we have an absolute right to expect that back. Actually, I'd go further than that. I think we have a right to frankly, we have a right to demand that. And if that's not happening, then I think it's something that we do need to raise. Yeah.
I'm not sure what.
Well said.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a good answer, right?
I know from personal experience how horrible it can be, even with all of these laws in place. Like, I did have a manager who made homophobic comments all the time. It was horrific. I had to get out, so I made the decision to leave the company and choose another path. It was a great job, but yeah, it's just I couldn't spend the rest of my life being miserable going to work. So yeah, it can affect people very seriously.
I remember we were saying all of that still in the context of living in a country where you can be fired from your job in Ireland for being gay. So if you work within particular sectors, if you work in education now, it's going to change, and the government has committed that it will change, and if you might say something about that, it is going to happen. But it remains the fact that if you're a teacher or if you're working in an institution that's governed or run by an organisation with an ethos that discriminates against LGBTI people, you can be fired from your job for being who you are. That's also true.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find challenging is, again, my team, there's about 70 people based all around the world, from Kenya to Sao Paulo, Singapore, Shanghai, and I'm always conscious of the fact that there are a lot of people on my team who are working in countries where it's technically illegal to be gay. So
there's a cultural difference as well. Yeah.
Of course, we're very fortunate. Obviously, working for Google, it's incredible. There's no challenges or issues here. We're living in a bit of a bubble, I think. But when I start to think, what if I have to go visit one of my colleagues or go see my team in Kenya? How do I want to approach that? And I think it's certainly your colleagues' responsibility and the responsibility of the organization to make sure that the employees are safe as well, no matter what they do, so that nobody's being sort of forced to come out in these situations. Again, I had the pleasure of hearing Lord Brown speak about this a couple of weeks ago as well, and he had a very strong opinion as well that it's all about just not putting your employees into any sort of dangerous situation if they may live in a country where they don't have the same rights as everyone.
One statement you made was about our bubble. And Google here in Dublin is definitely a bubble, I think we can agree. And the tech sector, I think, is a bit of a bubble as well. And that's because it's all spawned from largely American, very liberal environments. And so we're having so much fun here tonight. You know, there's no pressure. When we asked our companies could we partake in these, they were jumping at the bit to try and get involved and, you know, push out their diversity programs. But as Colin says, that's not true for every sector, education being one of them, specifically teachers in Ireland. So a question I have is, what do you think it could add if all of that changes? If in 10 years' time this question is redundant, what do you think it could add to the workplace, to this environment?
Well, what has it added to your workplace? I mean, you guys have the answer to that, haven't you? I mean, what does it mean to you to be able to be here this evening, to be able to work in an environment where you're celebrated? I don't mean in a big rah-rah way, but where you're actually able to be fully yourself. I mean, that's incredibly important. But, you know, let's think about that from the perspective of, you know, when we talk about the bubbles that we live in, I think those bubbles then provide us with an extraordinary opportunity to stand in solidarity with other people in other places where those bubbles don't exist. You know, and it's why, for instance, for Amnesty International, it's why we have such a strong focus on Pride and on Pride marches happening and being present at Pride. Because, you know, when we take part in Pride marches, we're marching in solidarity with those who can't march, you know, or who still are, despite the fact that they can't. With people like, you know, Kasha Jacqueline in Uganda, who holds Ugandan pride. I mean, Christ, the courage to do something like organize Pride in Uganda. Or, you know, to my colleague who's the director of Amnesty in Ukraine, who organizes, you know, Ukrainian Pride, you know, and they only get to go 100 meters, and there's more police and security than with anybody else. But they hold it because they are determined. And she's not a member of the community, but from an Amnesty perspective, we feel it's vitally important that visibility happens and that solidarity happens. And I think what a lot of you guys get to do in your roles, and frankly what your companies get to do, is demonstrate the case for human rights in the context that we're talking about here. The value of that, but also to assert the determination that these rights will be respected within your spaces. That's incredibly important. Because, you know, quite frankly, big multinationals are now more important than most states. You know, Google has more influence than Ireland does as a state. I think it's fair to say. But I'm not downplaying the significance of the importance of Ireland as a state. We have a really important role in the world, and we play a very particular role within the international political and legal systems. But actually, Google has a huge imprint on the state. The same is true of, I don't name everybody now, haven't I? The same is true of Twitter, of LinkedIn, of Facebook, of Airbnb, and everybody else. So, you know, that assertion of, you know, at the corporate level, of a determined demand that within our spaces, within our organizations, we don't just respect diversity, we demand respect for diversity, is something that those who would oppose that are going to have to listen to in time. If they want you as part of their economies, as part of their structures, if they want access to your networks. And I think that's incredibly important.
I think that what Colin is speaking about is that the real privilege and also opportunity of being a member of a minority group. Because we see the world through a different experience, and we know, I suppose, again, the oppression and the restriction of being put down because of who we are and how much that holds everything back. And so if we do happen to have that privilege to be in a context, and in a work context, where there's an openness and where that is not the case, then I think then, well, and that's the way I feel. I feel then that you know, that there is a privilege to that, and the opportunity then as a minority is, and the responsibility, I think, being members of a minority group, is to find ways to create that safety and that well-being for others. But I want to say too that it was an extraordinary experience for me to walk into this building. I haven't been here before, but to walk into the building, and it's not, you know, sure, it's wow, Google, but it wasn't actually that part. It was the part was when I came up the stairs and I saw tons of people queuing, and then I saw all the you know, the signage that said, welcome to Intertech LGBT, and you're in Google, and you're in Dublin, and you're in Ireland. And I just found it so profoundly moving because, again, so many years ago, what that represents is the extraordinary change that's going on. Yes, because of the wonderful people who have organized this event and following the leadership of Kelly and others who did it before, but that it, you know, right now we're participating in the change, and I just find it's an amazing experience. So I really want to thank all of you for that. And it's out of that then, well, you know, I think. You know, I would like to invite, you know, I think, you know, there is a responsibility here, and, you know, of what to do with that safe place and how to spread the good news, and I anticipate that you will. And as we've been describing too, both, well, lots of parts of the world, and you especially work, but, you know, and as well as in Ireland, we need that more than ever right now. We need that more than ever as we head towards another milestone. But I can tell you this much, that when Anne-Louise and I decided to take a case against the Irish state, yes, we did it for ourselves, and in fact, that's one of the, you know, anyhow, yes, we did do it for ourselves, but, you know, as well, a prime motivating factor was for the young LGBT people in the country, because whatever you think about marriage, but let me tell you, it's feeling pretty good for me. But whatever you think, yeah, exactly. As a married guy too. Whatever you think about marriage and all the, you know, critique and the patriarchal institution, and you know, we've had a few opinions recently.
We can change that.
Yeah, whatever you think about it, at the same time, the fact that we're on the cusp of opening, you know, such a, I was going to use the word sacred, but that's not right. But anyhow, such a treasured, profound, you know, institution, and opening that up to ourselves. I mean, the kind of snowball effect that that's going to have in terms of, if you're not out, frankly, I think that's going to make a big difference if you're not out, and certainly for the young people behind us. So.
And it's nice because it kind of takes us from one of the points that you made at the beginning, which is that it should never feel like a pressure to come out. And equally, that when we talk about this responsibility that we all have, I think it's more about recognizing it as an opportunity that's incredibly enriching. You know, one of the joys, frankly, of working in a way that demands that you're out, because quite frankly, it's impossible not to be, is then you are. And you suddenly realize how liberating that is, and how enriching that is. And when you get to have conversations with people where you're sparking off each other, and you can suddenly see all kinds of light starting to shine around you. I mean, it's just the most rewarding, enriching, life-affirming, fantastic thing to be part of. So don't hear it as a demand. Yes, hear it as a responsibility, but one that just has the most extraordinary capacity to expand your experience of what it means to be human. It is the most enriching thing you will ever do, is when you allow yourself to fully step into yourself and allow that experience of self-expression to be empowering for other people. And just to have that start to bounce off around the world is genuinely, I mean, truly transformative at a global level. And it starts with you, it really, really does. And it's so exciting.
Yeah. And just add to that, like, to answer this question directly, like, why is it good, why is coming out good for business? It's basically, you don't want your employees to be spending any of their energy trying to hide their true selves. You want that energy to go into the incredibly creative endeavors that everybody in this room and the companies that we all work for focus on. And I think this is really, for the tech sector in particular, how many people have heard of the new film that's coming out about Alan Turing?
The Imitation Game.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it just premiered in London last night, and there was like a full page about it and Alan Turing's history, and you basically have this brilliant mind that, because of his homosexuality, lost to society, effectively. And it's just such a waste. And I think we live in a time and an age and a place now where that shouldn't be happening. And I just say, use your energy to kind of do the things you love rather than kind of hide who you are.
Awesome.